Well, guys, welcome to Conversations. My name is John Thomas and my friend Graham Cooke. We've been here at the Love and Prophecy Conference and been having such a good time.
It's been great.
Such a good word that you were bringing just on the instead.
Oh, yeah.
Just flipping the immediate negative response to expectation of potential. What's God want to give instead?
Right.
So that's really, really helpful. But I wanted to take a minute and just talk a little bit about stewarding revelation.
Right.
It's one of the things that I've seen very few people that have taught as well as what I've gotten from the books that you've written. But in the context of a community, so you get people that are coming together to discover what it is that Jesus is doing in their midst and wanting to do through them. How do we discern the revelation that's corporate and how to respond to that? And we could talk for days, maybe a couple points.
Yeah. Funnily enough, that was one of my first jobs in the church, in the prophetic, was I was the one that I had a small team and we masterminded the response factor for each person. So when somebody got a prophetic word, we never did prophetic ministry from a platform. We did it all relationally. But all through the course of the year, we would be telling like a family, 2 months from now, on this date, we're going to do some corporate prophetic ministry over your family. And then we're going to start a conversation that comes out of that. So every single person in the church got a prophetic word over the course of like maybe a couple of 3 years or something. And then we use that word to disciple them. So, but I would get, whenever we had words about ministry or calling and so on, then we would every word was recorded and then they were typed out. We had an administrative assistant and we typed them out into paragraphs that were double spaced between each other and a sidebar that was where you could make notes and so on. And so then I would take this person, or we might take a group, and we would go through the prophetic word and we would look at things like, what were the keys? What were the key elements? If God was giving you a key that would open a door, we would just put a key symbol at the end of that sentence. And then we'd look at to see how many times was a particular word, spoken. Was it spoken 7 or 8 times? That's the key. And key phrases, key words, any descriptive words and so on. We started to log all of those things because they were all going to be part of our conversation. And if we're looking at, a very distinctive calling and you realize that the word has a longevity attached to it, so it's probably going to become a ministry, then you had to start having a conversation. Because typically what happens with the Lord is he gives us a word when we're at this level and the word is about this level.
Yeah.
And then we have to know, how do we get you from here to here? And the first thing we have to do is we have to make sure that your lifestyle, your character actually rises up to the same level as the calling, And so one of my first questions, there was one particular guy, very extrovert. This guy could sell snow to Eskimos. He's that kind of guy, brilliant. I loved him. And my first comment to him was, Steve, I think there's probably a 60% chance of this word coming to pass. And he looked at me and he went, what? I said, yeah, I think 60%, I would give it a 60% chance, as things stand right now, that this word will actually come to pass. He said, well, what do you mean? God can do anything. I said, we're not talking about him. We're actually talking about you. We're talking about the areas in your life right now that would prevent things from going. Yeah. The gaps in your life, in your relationship with the Lord and with people. So our conversation needs to be, how can you and I and this team, how can we help you bridge those gaps and and build those different levels into your life. So for the next 3 months, that's all we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about the word. We're going to talk about how do we get you into a place where God could quicken you in this. Because if we don't do anything here, this is going to take probably 5 to 10 years. But if we do something here for 6 months, you could get there a heck of a lot quicker. And which do you want? He went, well, I want to get there quickly. And I said, okay, but the speed of that depends on your honesty here. So, and he looked at me and he said, it sounds like you already know what you want to do. And I said, do you know? And he went, well, no, not really. I said, so how is it I know more than you about you? What's that about? And he looked at me and went, okay, you got me. And that was it. And he honestly, he attacked it. And that's what you want from people. You want them to go after their own stuff and get rid of it. And he attacked it. So what I thought would take about a year actually did take about 5.5 months.
Wow.
Then he's in a whole different place. I watched him cry. I watched him wail a few times. I watched him try to obfuscate and get out of it, and then realized he'd backed himself into a corner, and the only people looking at him is us. So, and then I watched him come clean, and then he started getting into the ministry, and honestly, he has just gone from strength to strength to strength. And he is, if you ever get a chance to go on to the internet and just Google Miracle Street.
Miracle Street.
Okay. You'll find Steve and a whole bunch of people. When you know what a person is really like in their true self, you can annex that and use it and develop it, and then use it in terms of their own growth, and so then we sat down, we talked through the prophetic word with him. We looked at all the keys, and we looked at the timelines, and we got him writing crafted prayers in certain areas, saying, Lord, he started to isolate where it talked about resources. He knew that we taught him to, write prayers in those areas. We taught people this, write prayers in those areas that are prayers of response. And in other areas, you're writing prayers about, maybe there was a country mentioned, Lord, so you start praying for that country. Maybe start learning some language. And, we taught them to interact with the word that they had, and to let their lives, really, it's just a matter of, if you were in a boat, it's putting the sails up because the wind's blowing. And so you get driven by the prophetic word, because that's your word of promise. That's the word about your lifestyle. That's the word that should govern you, And so we were constantly saying to people, you can't let this word go. What if this word could be fulfilled in 3 years? I know people who are still moaning about the fact that we got a word 20 years ago and it never came to pass. Well, it never came to pass because they never actually engaged with it. They were waiting, oh, well, if it's God, he'll do something. That's never been true. Never been true once. God calls us to a partnership. So when he says something, he's looking for a response back. Then he's looking for you to start thinking about partnership. How do I respond? What do you want to be for me now? How do I get there? What is it you want to do? What are you saying to me? What can I believe you for? What can I trust you for? You're finding things out about God, about yourself, but you're interacting with that word and you're cooperating with it, and you're in partnership with the Lord. And then, because the prophetic, for me, that's what it does. It's a catalyst to get you moving. So we're not waiting for God to start doing something. We're actually partnering with him because we're expecting him to do something. So my thought is, why can't we do it now? If you're behind the time of your development, you need to speed things up. So let's get on with it.
Yeah.
Let's not wait. There is a culture of passivity around the prophetic.
Yes.
And we need to break it, really, because the prophetic it's a catalyst, and we need kingdom catalysts now like never before.
Yeah.
And why should you take 15 years to get somewhere when you could get there in less time?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's too easy for us to grab hold of a word because we like the concept of it, but because we don't want to do the hard work, we just, I've got the word.
Right.
And in some ways, we get taught to do that.
We do.
Because we've been conditioned that when we hear the word of God, it's merely about us acknowledging that it's true, not about actually living it. And because of that, we do the same thing with prophecy that we do with doctrine. Like, doctrine is amazing because that teaches us how to live. It's not amazing because it teaches us how to think.
Right.
It teaches us how to live. But prophecy is amazing because it teaches us how to live.
Right.
Now, thinking and living are supposed to be the same. Now, we've divorced them in our culture because we don't see that connection. We think that we can believe something and not actually live it, not realizing that that's not belief. You don't actually believe it if you're not living it.
Right.
I think if we can bring those together in the prophetic and begin to think through the implications. Okay, so if God said this, then this must be true, and I need to do this, and this is a step that I can get there, and I'm going to need this resource, so I can expect that. And we think through the implications because of the promise and bring them together.
That's brilliant.
And having a group of people that are willing to do that together,
that is brilliant.
It really changes because we challenge each other.
Right.
Because it's easy to not realize that you're believing something untrue.
Right.
Because you believe what you believe.
Right.
Which is why we need his input and why we need each other's input, because it's bringing us back to truth, bringing us back to reality so that we can see ourselves, see the world, and see God the way that it actually is versus the way that we thought it was.
We have a culture of impartation right now that's out of balance, I think. But God only works by process and impartation. And it's like two doors into the same room. God can be teaching you a process, which is how he wants to be with you, the things he wants to change in you. And it's the process that makes you rich, not the outcome. Mm-hmm. The process is where you learn about who Jesus is for you. Yeah. You learn about how God likes you. You learn about how to be with him. You learn how to get rid of stuff and how to replace it with stuff. You do the insteads. That's a process. Yeah. And then after the process is complete, he gives you an impartation that takes it up several levels. Or you can come in and he'll give you an impartation that he expects you to turn into a process so that you put that into action and become it. So either way, it's not either or, it's both and. So if you get process, you go through it, you get impartation. If you have an impartation, you've got to take it into process to inherit something. But most people just want impartation. And really, that's magic.
And that's it.
They want magic.
That's it. We want magic. We want a genie in a bottle.
Right.
God comes out, gives me what I want, and then he goes away so I can go about my life and have it my way. Because we don't actually want a God. We want a genie. Right. Because a God requires relationship, which means I've got to work towards knowing him and getting deeper. But if I've got a genie, then I can just do whatever I want. I can be my own God.
Exactly.
I don't have to actually submit to something else. Right. And my life is about my comfort. Right. I mean, we've allowed the culture to seep into our Christianity, where we've given religious language to cultural norms. Right. And so, we can buy the quick fix and we can get the lottery ticket. And most of us, we think of impartation like winning the lottery. Right. Like, because if you've been around impartation enough, you realize not every time somebody lays hands on you, do you get impartation. Right. Because it's not always what God's doing in the moment and all those different things. And so we think of meetings like a lottery ticket. Well, maybe I'll hit the lottery this time and everything will be better.
Right.
But the problem with lottery is if you take a look, people win the lottery, a year later, 3 years later, they're worse
broke.
off than what they were before they won the lottery.
Exactly.
They're worse off. And God knows that. And in his goodness, he doesn't often give it to us because he knows it's going to hurt us. That the thing that we want the most. And so he draws us into that process. But I think that one of the things that we've lost in the Western church and definitely the American church that we need to get back if we really want to know the ways of God is going deeper into the Proverbs. If we understand the Proverbs, we will know more about the ways of God. And one of the biggest things in the Proverbs is the lazy versus the diligent. And if we can learn that and bring that into what it means to be like Jesus and have that part of our culture in the church, we won't have to worry about people being afraid of process.
Yeah. And people always twin diligent with discipline. And you can't get into anything with God by discipline at the beginning. You have to have a delight. And it's delight that teaches you discipline.
Yeah.
So like I had a friend who was an athlete and ran for Great Britain and won a medal at the Olympics. And I remember the BBC reporter is all over him and saying, thank you for all the times when you got up in the early morning and you ran through the streets of London in the wind and the rain. And thank you for eating the right foods and disciplining yourself. And thank you for not going to parties and doing this. And he's all over him. And Chris just went, dude, stop. He said, I don't do anything out of discipline in my sport. I do it out of delight.
Yes.
I love to run. And when you love to do something, you will do anything to do it. So discipline is an outcome. It's not the process. The process is delight. Delight yourself in the Lord. God operates out of delight all the time. He loves to work with us. He's well pleased to give us the kingdom. He loves the whole process of being our master craftsman and everything else. He delights in everything he does. And we start everything with delight. And somewhere discipline comes in, but you don't even notice it. And it's not onerous. You do the discipline because you're delighted. Delight opens up a way. Then
so good.
Discipline then is an outcome, but it's not the initial part of the process. And I love that. Just saying to people, you have to love what you're doing. Or our most common expression is love the learning.
Yeah.
If you don't love the learning, you won't commit to it.
Yeah.
Now, on the Brilliant team, we all love learning. So we get together at the end of a week. What did we learn this week? I'm learning this. I'm learning this. Oh my God, this is so good. I'm learning that. And there's an energy that comes out of loving something, that's really powerful. Really powerful.
Yeah.
And I think we've created a culture where people rent the truth, but they don't buy into it.
That's good.
They rent it, and we teach them that every Sunday. We give 52 life-changing messages with no hope of their life changing because the messages are often not powerful enough. They're not energetic enough. And there's not enough time in a week to really change from a powerful message. A really great message takes at least a month to process. So why would you want to fill the other 3 weeks with another message? How many messages have we heard collectively? We don't buy into the fullness of who Jesus is. We don't buy into abundance. We don't buy into favor. We don't buy into any of it because we still want to keep going to a meeting and getting ministry. And that kind of lifestyle that, we propagate really has created a bunch of renters. We're a rental company. We just rent truth out to people. Yeah. But we've created a culture where people become dependent on a meeting. rather than dependent on a lifestyle with Jesus. We're renting the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I rent cars an awful lot, and you hear comments when you have a rental car. I mean, just use it up,
Right.
because you don't own it.
Right.
So when you have ownership, then you have stewardship.
Exactly.
But when you rent, it's actually, you never really value it.
Right. You don't even think about it.
Yeah. It's just for that momentary experience, but there's no long-term ownership. So how can we as prophetic people develop the mindset of ownership when God gives us a word?
Yeah.
How can we develop the mindset of ownership so that we actually take our stewardship seriously? That's the word I'm looking for.
I think it's the whole issue really of follow through. There's no real breakthrough without follow through. A breakthrough in a meeting is where we all celebrate, woo, I got a great word from the Lord. But that's not really a breakthrough. That's just, that is you acknowledging you've got a word. But now you have to participate. So then we have to do the follow through of saying to people, okay, where do we go from here? This is a catalyst. God's saying yes to you. God is investing himself in your life. How are you going to respond to that? And so we need to make something happen. And people say, oh, well, no, if God's going to do it, we can't make things happen. I beg to differ. I think we're both in it together. It's a mutual partnership. And if I'm trying to make something happen and he's not happy with that, he'll tell me. Mm-hmm. But sometimes he'll just say, we need to say, what is your response to God in this part of the word? What do you think is needed right now? If you've got a passion for that country, are you learning the language? Do you have their money? Are you thinking in terms of what things cost? What research you're doing into the country itself? What are you up to?
Yeah.
And what are you doing in your life right now that you can at some point extricate yourself from something as you come into, because there's going to be a crossover, But I was talking to one guy who had a brilliant word. He had a high-powered job earning a lot of money. And I'm saying, you do realize these two worlds are incompatible. So if you're coming into this ministry, at some point, you're going to have to come out of this. Now, you've just bought yourself a house and landed yourself with, you've got like about a £750,000 mortgage. So what's that about? You expecting to run a ministry and pay the bills for that? Wow. So do you really need an 8-bedroom house when you've got 2 kids? Do you need a television in every room in your house? Do you really need 6 cars in your, in the front of your house? Do you need a 4-car garage? What are you doing? What are you doing? You need to prepare to serve the Lord.
Yeah.
And some of that is you need to divest yourselves of certain things, and you need to accrue to yourself other things. Yeah. So what does that mix look like right now? Here's the thing. You're free to do whatever you want. Mm. I don't want to control you. I don't want to say you've got to do this. You are totally free to do whatever you want. And it's your decision how you want to serve the Lord. We're just saying this is a really big word. Yeah. And it's going to require a response equally as grand. Yeah. So, but hey, it's your life. Yeah. You work it out. Yeah. And that's it. But all we're doing is saying, I think these two things may be incompatible. I think right now you like making money more than you like doing this. So if you're acknowledging this is the word of the Lord, something's got to change somewhere. You need to be asking the Lord, what is it you want to put your finger on first? Yeah. And, he never did go forward.
Wow.
And, he lost his business, lost his house, lost his wife. And, he's 20 years behind the time of who he could have been. So he's just living with regret right now. And, he's at a different church and they're just trying to see what they can, rake out of the ashes, So, it's not cut and dried because you've got a prophetic word that you're going to go there and have all that. you've got some work to do.
Yeah.
And hopefully you've got a bunch of friends around you who can teach you how to prepare and get involved in that. This whole idea of, we don't know what to do right now. Let's get a prophetic guy in our team in. Let's throw out loads of words and make people feel good. But then we never follow through on those words. So what's going to happen is you're going to accrue a whole bunch of disappointment somewhere down the line.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's like the whole thing of, calendar prophecy. It's the last day of the year. What's the Lord saying this year? And I'm not a great fan of that because I get asked to do it all the time. And my question to those guys is, what did the Lord say last year? And sometimes they can't even tell me. Or they can tell me, and I say, well, has it come to pass? And they say, well, not yet. I said, well, this is the word of the Lord. Carry on with the word that you've got.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
The idea that God does think in line with time, but not to a calendar. And this is a new year, new word.
Yeah.
Now, some churches have got words that have never come to pass. So now they have a culture of people going, woohoo, okay, back to normal. It's like going to a meeting where incredible things happen and you get a breakthrough with the Lord and you're coming out the door and the devil's waiting there with some change and he goes, hey, these belong, don't forget, don't leave these behind. And you put the chain straight back on. I don't even know what we're doing half the time in our meetings. I think when you have a meeting context for everything, sometimes we fail to do life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when I was just in that process 15, 20 years ago, I started getting prophetic words that I was going to be preaching, that I was going to be teaching.
Right.
And I thought, okay, I'm working in a bank.
Right.
They've got a back room that was an old boardroom that they didn't use anymore. And it had a little podium. So during my lunch hour, I would eat in 10, 15 minutes and I'd go back into that room and I would preach to an empty room for 20, 30 minutes, almost every week. I would just practice preaching to the empty room. And I spent my time studying. I prepare messages and I preach my messages.
Right.
And I taught myself to preach because I was told I was going to be a preacher.
Right.
So if I'm going to be a preacher, I better learn how to do it.
Right.
I've got to figure it out. I've got to be prepared.
Right.
And now I get opportunities to preach. And, I love, my mentor, John Paul, he always told me that anybody gets invited to someplace once, but you have something if you get invited back.
Right. Right.
And that I get invited back because I pressed into that word to be faithful with what was given. And it's too easy to just go from word to word to word. And I think sometimes it's the prophetic church that is more likely to be guilty of despising prophecies than the cessationist church.
Right.
Because the word despise, it doesn't mean to hate.
Right.
It means to make little of.
Right. To make light.
And when we don't value a prophetic word enough to actually take the time to steward it and work together to prepare and to walk it out, we aren't despising prophecies. We are quenching Holy Spirit in that process.
Right. And that's interesting, with the whole being able to record it thing, when we could record them. The fascinating thing about that was we would go back to the people who gave the prophecy and we would type it out and we'd have some questions like, what's the word that's mentioned the most? And it was usually, or I think, I said, so what we did was
just cross all those out.
We blacked all those out and said, this is your prophetic word. And this was the way we weaned people off spontaneous prophecy onto crafted prophecy. Because you look in the Old Testament and the language and the syntax and the grammar of those prophecies, you knew they were written down before they were ever spoken. It's like, Jeremiah had a secretary called Barak, and the Lord said to him, take a scroll and write down all the words I've ever given to you. So, and he writes them all down. Of course, he's on house arrest, so Barrett gets to go out and speak them out,
read
you know. But they're all crafted prophetic words. And mostly, I love spontaneous prophecy, but I love crafted prophecy more, especially over groups and churches and cities, you know, because you get the time to sit down with the Lord about that group or about that city. And Lord, what do you see? What are you sensing? What do you want to do? And you craft a word over a period of 3 or 4 months that's prayed through and so on. And then you go and release it. And it's right. God puts it right into the substructure of the whole city and the whole community. And then you've got a word for an organization or a church that should drive your strategy from that point on.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the difference in a blessing prophet and a building prophet. Blessing prophets are constantly moving in the spontaneous. I have no problem with that, but I do think we need to beef up the language and the vocabulary of those. And say to people, you know, come with a few key words and so on. Don't just be in the moment with God. You know, that's not the best way of doing it. You need to be, we need to be in that moment, but we need to be in a few other moments before we get to that moment. You know, and you come with something that now you've got all these hooks that you can start to listen in a context, you know, rather than into a vacuum. And what was interesting, we used that whole thing of how many times did you say if we can just reduce the ums and the ers, that makes it interesting. But how about you study with a few people? We bought them a dictionary and a thesaurus, and we just said, you know, you need to study words, what words mean, and you need to get excited about certain words, and you need to understand that there's sometimes God will speak to you in key words, but if you haven't got a good enough vocabulary, you'll never hear it. So I had to study the dictionary and a thesaurus, and how many ways can I use that? I mean, the whole thing about writing is you can't use the same key word in a sentence twice. You know? So you start to learn how words evolve, and you start to learn about antonyms and synonyms and all of that stuff, and you know, and how to express yourself in a much broader way. And when we did, people did dictionary class, you know, and we just talked about words and what we liked about it. And why don't you come next week with a different descriptive word for each person in the class?
That's fun.
And that was fun. And what was fascinating was after a period of time, you would be in a class with 6 or 8 people, say 8 people, and 8 people would give you a different descriptive word, and we would put them together, right? And then we would give, so each person then would go with all the words for this person, and then you'd come back next week and weave it into a prophecy, weave it into a word of encouragement or a word of prophecy, and see what happens. So then they began to see, oh my gosh, suddenly their prophecies were much richer, more broad, more deep. You know, they had real depth and height to them, and then everyone wanted to be in dictionary class.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
That's a good. That's a really good assignment. That's a good.
I'm going to use
part
that.
of the school.
That's really good. I love that concept. And I love the concept because you're taking words that all these different people got,
right,
and you're taking all of them and you're crafting the word from all the different pieces. Which
and then what you're doing is you're getting into the process of you're hearing God say single descriptive words about people. And then you're putting them together with the Holy Spirit, who's a genius at that.
So good.
So you get into the mindset of hearing that way. I still read the dictionary. I still want to know another fresh word, different words. So I still try to learn like 30 words a year.
Wow.
And then some of the, synonyms that go with that. You know, I want to know this word, how many meanings? You know, and then you end up with like one word has 3 distinct meanings that touch your heart. So I have a little notebook with them in, and I'm going to weave them into my language. You know. So
You have an iPad, right?
sorry.
Do you have an iPad?
Yeah.
So Oxford has a little app called WordFlex.
WordFlex.
It is a mind mapping dictionary thesaurus.
I love mind mapping.
So you have the dictionary, and it has you figure out your word, and it puts the word down and gives you the definition, the etymology, but then it has branches
Right.
for different definitions of all the thesaurus for that definition, all the synonyms, and then all the synonyms for this definition. It is amazing.
You just
I love
upgraded dictionary class.
I use it all the time. I love it. It's so good.
That was amazing. That's worth the price of admission.
Right there. It just helped. That's great.
But it's just the joy of working with people and the joy of words.
Yeah.
And God loves words, and He uses words so accurately.
Yeah.
You know, and I love that about him. He's so precise in his language. You know.
Graham, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for this conversation. It's been awesome. So good.
Yeah. Cool, man.
Dude.
Thank you. That was brilliant.
Man.
That was fun.
That was fun.